Hey guys, welcome back to Steel City Sports. So today I want to talk about 5 NFL coaches that will be fired in this offseason. Most of these guys are obvious. They're on this reason for clear reasons. Either their team just was really disappointing this year, their team just sucks. I did save one guy for last, though, that's maybe not so obvious. I could see you making a case for him keeping his job. We'll get to that. But this list is in no particular order. But I did want to start off with Mike McCarthy, and this is a guy that already had a lot of pressure on his back going into this year. He was going into the final year of his contract as the coach of the Cowboys, and that's almost like unprecedented for that to happen. I think that's a real clear sign that ownership, management of the team is just not really sold on the coach. And usually whenever a coach gets in their final year, they'll be extended or it just never happens where a coach gets in their last year because they're usually extended or fired before that happens. So this is a very unique situation with Mike McCarthy. And I think it really came down to the fact that Jerry Jones was kind of like, okay, Mike, this is your prove-it year. You've won a lot in the regular season, but you haven't delivered in the playoffs whatsoever. They won 12 games back to back to back. They were really good in the regular season, just always came up short come playoff time. And we were having the conversation before this season that basically, I think we came to the conclusion that Mike McCarthy basically had to make it to the NFC title game to keep his job this year. And they're not even going to make the playoffs. So I don't really think you can quantify how big of a disaster this is for the Dallas Cowboys, especially when you have Jerry Jones saying going into the year, we're all in on this team. The Cowboys are a dumpster fire right now. They're going to be, after they give Micah Parsons his contract, which I'm sure they're going to do, they're not just going to let him walk, obviously. They're going to be paying 3 players almost $500 million in all guarantees between Dak, CeeDee, and Micah. You combine that with the fact that the rest of the roster is a disaster. This year, they're heavily underperforming. They have a very bleak future going forward, and everyone talks about, I see this really popular narrative going around lately about the Cowboys of, they can tank, get the number 1 pick, draft Shador, bring in Dion. That's not going to happen. They're not drafting a quarterback. They just gave Dak Prescott, the biggest deal in NFL history. What the fuck are you guys talking about? And Jerry Jones would never hire a head coach like Deion Sanders because he would take away the spotlight from him. That's why he likes to hire these kind of bland coaches like Jason Garrett, like Mike McCarthy. I think Mike McCarthy is a capable play caller. I would not have a problem with him being an OC of a team, but in terms of being an overall leader of a football team, he's a joke. He's just not prepared in 2024 to be an NFL head coach. To me, he's too limited of a guy. He doesn't really inspire. He's not a great leader of men, and he's not this great schematic guy. He's not a great manager of the game. I think his game management, clock management is actually one of his biggest flaws and has directly costed them playoff games because he just doesn't really know how to quite manage a game still. And he's been a coach for decades. He was with Green Bay forever. He was with the Cowboys for a while now. And it still seems like he just doesn't really know how to manage a football game. He's not a great leader. So I think he'd be a fine play caller for a team out there. He probably will get a job as an OC later down the line if he wants it. But as a head coach, his time's up in Dallas. I mean, just complete disappointment this season was. A complete dumpster fire. Not really too surprising for me. I saw this coming. I did not have the Cowboys as a playoff team, but they're even worse than what I thought they'd be. They're sitting at 3-6 right now, and they're clearly nowhere near a playoff team. So McCarthy will, I guess, technically not fired. His contract's just going to run up. So Mike McCarthy will be gone this offseason. The next head coach I think will be fired this offseason is Doug Peterson. Jacksonville, they had a lot of expectations going into this season. They might have been misplaced expectations, but they did give Trevor Lawrence a massive extension. I think that indicates, hey, we believe in this team. We want to double down. And it's obvious they overpaid Trevor Lawrence. I did defend that contract at the time because I was like, hey, they won a playoff game with him. He's looked good in spots. What do you want them to do? Just start over fresh? But it's clear that's a terrible contract. Trevor Lawrence is a good, not great quarterback, and I just think he's too limited to carry this roster, and Doug Peterson, unfortunately, is going to be the one who gets the blame for that. I don't like his picks at coordinator, particularly offensive coordinator. That guy's a clown. And when you look at like last year, they started off 8-3, had such a big lead over the Texans in their division. They should have cruised into the playoffs after that. They went on to win one more game. They finished with 9 wins, missed the playoffs. They lost. All they had to do last year to get in the playoffs was win their last game of the season against the Titans. The Titans, up until that point, had 3 wins on the season. They lost that. That, to me, was a fireable offense. Like, that just showed that your team has absolutely zero fucking heart. Like, to get into the playoffs, you lose. All you have to do is beat a 3-win team and you get into the playoffs, and they fucking lost. And I just think that was so bad. That was so embarrassing that Peterson could have been fired for that alone, because that is just totally unacceptable for your team to just give up like that. And then going into this year, I didn't have them as a playoff team, but I thought they'd at least be like a scrappy 8-9 win team, competitive, threaten to get into the wild card spot. They ain't even close. 2-8. You can't really quantify how big of a disaster that is, especially after giving Trevor Lawrence that monstrous contract to go 2-8. And, I get it. It's not all on Trevor Lawrence. I think the defense is really bad as well. They don't have a lot of great players on defense outside of, Josh Allen. That's, it. The rest of their defensive unit is kind of a mess. They were the only team through, 5 weeks that did not generate a turnover. It's a very unproductive defensive unit, and the offense is just not good enough to overcome that. I think Lawrence is a good quarterback, not a great quarterback. He's not good enough to elevate, and Doug Peterson, unfortunately, is going to fall on the sword for that. And if you just look back at, the history of Doug Peterson's coaching tenure, he obviously started in Philly. He's been in Jacksonville. This is his 3rd year there. When you look at his career, I believe it was his first year they won the Super Bowl in 2017 with Nick Foles. They captured that lightning in a bottle. They had a stacked roster. They had playmakers all over that team. So obviously you give Doug credit for that. He beat Bill Belichick in a Super Bowl. But outside of his Super Bowl year, he's never won over 10 games. He has never won over 10 games outside of his first year as an NFL head coach. So maybe this just kind of is what Doug Peterson is. He's kind of a mediocre head coach. He doesn't really elevate a lot. He can manage a really stacked roster. As a matter of fact, I would take him over Sirianni with the Eagles right now. But in terms of going to a team to build up a culture, to establish, an up-and-coming quarterback and really build something up on his own, just doesn't look like he can do that. Because, they were good his first year in Jacksonville, but since then they have been one of the most disappointing teams in the NFL. And I just think with the money they've invested in the quarterback, Peterson will take the fall. He will be fired. And it's kind of a surprise to me that he hasn't already been fired with their record being so bad. Next up, we have Antonio Pierce of the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, this hiring never made sense to me. He was well-liked by the players. He went 5-4 last year as the interim. It looked like he rejuvenated the locker room. I get all that. But how many times in the history of the NFL have we seen a team turn around when they bring in an interim? It brings fresh energy to the group. They want to play good for the new guy. I get all that. But we have seen that time after time. And then to make this guy your actual not interim, your real head coach was a complete disaster. No other team in the NFL would have made Antonio Pierce their head coach. What were you thinking? You're in a coaching landslide matchup in every single divisional matchup. You look at the other coaches in this division. You have Jim Harbaugh, Sean Payton, and Andy Reid. And you're rolling out there with Antonio Pierce. You are basically going up there. Those guys I would all consider B+ and above. Peyton's a B+, Harbaugh's an A, Andy Reid's an A+, where with Antonio Pierce is a D- to me. So that right there basically guarantees you're probably going to lose every divisional matchup out there. They're 2-7 with Antonio Pierce as their coach, and I get it. It's not like they had a great roster, but this hire kind of showed you that they were doubling down on what they did in the back half of last year, which is what I just said. We've seen teams get hot when they bring in an interim coach. That doesn't mean your team's going to play good with him as the full-time coach. So no other team in the league would have hired this guy. He just isn't a head coach. That's not the job he should have. I don't think he will ever be hired again as a head coach. He just happened to get into this circumstance where he took over, the guys liked him, he got the job. But he's just not an NFL head coach. I like the passion he brings. He brings that fiery motivation, but At best, he's a coordinator. Like, this guy just should have never been a head coach in the NFL. It's a complete clown hire and really highlights why the Raiders have been mediocre for so long. Next up, we have another guy that I don't know how he has not been fired already, and that is Matt Eberflus. I think there's a strong chance that he does not finish this year as the head coach because out of all the teams we've talked about, Jacksonville, Dallas, Vegas, I think the Bears, out of all those teams, had the most hype going into this year. You could argue with the Cowboys, but the Bears, I think they were talked about more this offseason than the Cowboys just because of the simple fact they had the number 1 overall pick. They brought in all these flashy new toys like Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift, all that. So you have all that hype. You have this generational quarterback prospect, and for them to look this bad. Like I told you in the offseason, the number 1 priority for the Bears was to fire Matt Eberflus. You cannot roll into like this. It felt like this was the most important offseason for the Bears' entire history. Like this was it. For all the stuff you brought in, for bringing in a generational quarterback prospect, a Heisman winner, and you're going to let Matt Eberflus run that? Are you fucking crazy? Like, no shit, it didn't work out. Who the fuck is Matt Eberflus? Like, you're going to give a mediocre defensive coach the reins over guiding a generational quarterback? Are you out of your fucking mind? No wonder it didn't work out. And it's clear his coordinator didn't know what he was doing. Waldron's already been fired after only 10 games as the coordinator. So it was like the only way Eberflus was going to work out and keep his job is if the offense looked good and they, probably a 9-win team. They would have had to been like a 9 or 10-win team, I think, for Matt Eberflus to keep his job this year. But when you just look at the hype of this team, how bad they've been, how it looks like they're already fucking up Caleb Williams' career, like it's already going down the path of Trubisky or Fields. They're going to fire Matt Eberflus, and I think that they should have done it before the season. They should have already done it this season. They're going to do it in the offseason because he just brings nothing to the table. It's just a terrible, terrible decision. And I think it really just... the fact that they rolled into this year with him as the coach really, I think it just shows you, like, from a structural standpoint and a management standpoint, why the Bears have been so bad for so long. Similar to the Raiders. I had a guy in my comments the other day say that the Bears are the NFC version of the Raiders, and I kind of get that because, not from a personnel standpoint, but from a management standpoint. The people running these organizations don't really know what they're doing. Particularly the owners, like the owners of the Bears. What the I don't know. I just think it's a complete train wreck to roll into this year with Eberflus as the guy. I don't know whose call that was. Whoever had the decision to keep Eberflus around and decided to keep him, that person needs to be fired as well. They all need to go. I'd keep Ryan Poles as GM because he has made some really good moves for them. But outside of him, I would clean house. Like the president, Kevin something, he runs the Bears pretty much. He's got to go. The head coach has to go. All the coordinators have to go. Start new. Start fresh next year. You have to. And now there's a reason why I saved Zac Taylor for last, because I can really see realistically arguing for firing him or keeping him. I'll make the argument first for firing him. I just don't think he brings anything special to the table whatsoever. I think he got lucky that they got Burrow. He was kind of just along for the ride with Burrow. He's not bad. I think he's a fine coach, but he just doesn't really bring anything special. He doesn't really add anything to this mix. I think he was along for the ride. I mean, from a leadership standpoint, from a schematic standpoint, I don't really see him bringing a whole lot in that department. He's very bland, very vanilla. I don't really get it. And when you look at some of the coaches that could potentially be on the market this offseason, like Bill Belichick, like Mike Vrabel, like some of these college coaches that could potentially maybe want to jump into the NFL, I just think there's far better candidates for this job. And when you have Burrow, you can't really afford to waste years. Now, unfortunately, this is the Cincinnati Bengals. You have to keep in mind that Marvin Lewis didn't win a playoff game in 18 years and was the head coach there for 18 years. So if they're going to look at Zac Taylor and see, hey, he led us to a Super Bowl, that buys you a lot of credibility. You and me can say he sucks. Like I've bashed Sirianni a lot, but Sirianni can always say, I got my team to a Super Bowl. And there's really not a whole lot you can say back to that. Zac Taylor has that same argument. And I feel like Bengals, the ownership, they're a historically very cheap franchise. They're one of the cheapest franchises in the league, if not the most cheap. It's between them and Arizona. they're going to say, from a rationale standpoint, that obviously they don't want to pay top-tier money for a high-end head coach, so their rationale is going to be, hey, this guy got us to a Super Bowl. We're the only team outside of the Patriots to beat Mahomes in their dynasty, in the Chiefs dynasty era. The only team to beat them in the playoffs, not named Tom Brady, was the Cincinnati Bengals. So they have the arguments. I just think it's time for a change, especially when you look at the fact that this team is not the same. It's drastically different from what it was when they made the Super Bowl. They've lost a lot of key guys since that Super Bowl run, like Jesse Bates, like Joe Mixon, their O-line. They've been trying to patch up their O-line for years between the draft and the offseason. It feels like they still can't get that under wraps. I think T. Higgins is probably gone this offseason. They're paying Burrow a ton. They're going to pay Jamar a ton. They need someone to come in here and really just clean this up. And I don't really know who that is, but I know it's not Zac Taylor. He just doesn't really do a whole lot for me personally. If I had to bet, would they fire him? I don't think they will. But if it were me running the show, I absolutely would, because there's just far better people out there. Not that he's bad, just doesn't do a lot for me. But that's been it for 5 coaches I think should be fired this offseason. Let me know down in the comments if there's anyone else out there that you think, any other coaches that you believe should be fired. And if I talked about your team here, definitely let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.